I'm going to show you some important background to that horror that happened last night, because I think we need to understand a few things. But also tonight, on a day when the media is distracted by stabbings in Sydney, the Environment Minister sneaks out yet more green laws to hammer business. We'll talk about that. Also tonight, the Woolworths boss threatened with jail at Senate hearings for not coming clean on his profit margin.
I feel compelled to advise you that it is open to the Senate to hold a witness in contempt when they refuse to answer a legitimate question. I'm not interested in your spin or your bullshit.
Beware of a Greens politician with real power. And the Prime Minister rewards the Frenchman who confronted the Bondi Junction killer with a bollard. But first, let's cut to the chase about the stabbing last night of a Christian bishop. It is now time to talk honestly about how and why Australia has been changed into something I think few of us could recognise. A nation increasingly of tribes and old tribal and religious hatreds, stoked by social media, yes, but also by politicians inflicting on us their mass immigration, inflicting on us their multicultural policies and their disastrous race politics. Now, last night, an Assyrian Christian bishop was stabbed. Here is the vision, but a warning, it may distress you. Stabbed, there he is, by a 16-year-old, apparently Muslim, and here he is, held down by police and parishioners.
بس ليش عم بيسب رسولي ما كنت جيت لهون اذا عم بيدخل حلب ديني ما كنت جيت لهون بس هو عم بيدخل حلب ديني هي دين اذا هو حكى هي دين الشيطان مالتك حبيبي روح على شيطانك شوف شو يسوي عليك اذا هو بس حكى على دينه ما كنت جيت.
But there's actually a second part to this story that should disturb us all. I don't believe in this binary, one side good, the other bad. It's how the bishop's followers reacted by rioting against police and emergency workers who rushed to their church, trapping them there for hours. Now, 2 police were hurt, one got a broken jaw, and we heard this cry, which sounds like tribal revenge. Nothing like the kind of justice of our courts, a great gift from the British. An eye for an eye, and let's add to that this other stabbing yesterday. One overlooked in all this madness, actually a fight between youths armed with an axe and a machete, blood everywhere, in a shopping centre in Melbourne. Unverified reports it involves a Sudanese gang. Charges have been laid now before the courts. This new Australia. The head of the Australian Federal Police talking today about the stabbing of this bishop and the riot afterwards. Today let slip something. This, he said, was not the Australia he knew, or correction, had known.
It's a disgraceful act from the community who attacked police at that scene, and my support goes to the New South Wales Police Commissioner and the New South Wales police officers who are there to protect the community, and it was really not un-Australian to see that happen last night.
I don't know how we could define what's Australian and un-Australian anymore. I mean, Opposition Leader Peter Dutton, though, same thing, spoke of Australian values as if having to talk to new Australians who never knew them or had rejected them.
An act of violence in a place of worship is completely unacceptable in our country. We need to make sure that in our country we don't bring problems from around the world.
That needs saying now. Yet only one journalist at the Prime Minister's press conference today asked the question that came close to the concerns that millions of Australians will now have, but few will dare express.
Can I ask you whether you're concerned in any way about whether the multicultural project in Australia in recent times is facing new threats or challenges, and how significant the multicultural framework review might be in addressing any of these recent problems?
We have overwhelmingly a harmonious society in Australia. In my local community, people of different faith live side by side, and that is overwhelmingly the experience of Australians. It is vital, in my view, that we continue to stress what unites us.
We should stress what unites us, says this Prime Minister, who instead brought in a record 520,000 immigrants in a single year, who let more than 80 Australian councils refuse to hold citizenship ceremonies on Australia Day out of shame for our past, who parades in front of 3 flags now, 2 of Indigenous races, and who last year tried to get Australians to vote yes to dividing us by race in our Constitution and create an Aboriginal-only advisory parliament. Yes, we must unite, but Labor and the broader left have instead played with fire, and now we see the flames. Let me give you the background to last night that helps to explain the disturbing scenes we've just seen. Now, first, this bishop, Mamari Emmanuel. He came here from Iraq, became a bank manager, and then a priest of the Syrian church. That's for Christians who've basically fled Iraq and Syria, some from Turkey and Lebanon, came here to be safe, not expecting any of that to follow them. These are people who know all about persecution from radical Islamists. In Bishop Mamari's Iraq, for instance, war, the Islamic State and other Islamic terrorists cut the Christian population there from about 1.4 million at the turn of the century to just 250,000 today, or probably much less by some figures. That's why local Assyrians in Fairfield are so sensitive, why they push the mayor to stop Muslim women and children from the Islamic State being settled in their suburb. And now Bishop Mari actually got the boot from his church and created his own church, became an international TikTok star, an anti-woke, Trump-loving conservative one, railing, for instance, against compulsory vaccinations and against Joe Biden.
If Trump is not in the White House this year, you can kiss America goodbye.
Now, I've heard him today being widely criticised as provocative, saying bad things about other religions, like he's the one that maybe actually done wrong, brought this on himself. And never mind our beloved free speech.
Jesus Christ is neither Catholic nor Orthodox. Don't ever put any name on Jesus Christ.
Muhammad came in 635 and he said, he is not the Son of God, he is just a prophet. He was never crucified. In fact, Judas Iscariot was placed by God to deceive the Jews.
So he defended his faith. But the bishop wasn't stabbed by a Catholic, was he? No, apparently by a Muslim now. One of many Islamist attacks we've seen now. Now, I am glad that this attack on Bishop Mamari has been condemned by a top Muslim body. Good on them. But again, I ask, is there something about Islam? And before you two say, well, of course the bishop was provocative, provocative defending his faith, well, that's a crime now. Know that he also pleaded for compassion for the Palestinians of Gaza, for Muslims. He actually went there.
There is a lot of Palestinians got nothing to do with what is happening there. They just want to live in peace. And I'm sure on the Israeli side as well. I'm sure. Because I've met Jewish people, absolutely beautiful. Very respectful. Beautiful people. Absolutely beautiful. From both sides, absolutely beautiful.
A man like this gets stabbed in front of his own congregation? That seems like an act likely born from old tribal hatreds and religious ones. And that background I gave you about the Assyrians, it also helps to explain the violent reaction from the crowd last night. About 500 locals, many sounding like they wanted to punish the 16-year-old themselves, as if they didn't believe in leaving it to our legal system.
People running, screaming, calling for blood. Unfortunately, the assailant, who was apparently under house arrest inside the church, wasn't released. The authorities seem to think that his safety was more important than the safety of the community.
Well, both sides then with very different notions of justice than our own. Well, is there now an our own here? Tribal justice. But to the boy, there's only so much we can say or show about a minor, someone just 16. But a top spy agency does believe he was motivated by a religion to commit terrorism.
It does appear to be religiously motivated, but we continue our lines of investigation. At the same time, our job is also to look at individuals connected with the attacker to assure ourselves that there is no one else in the community with similar intent.
We also know this boy was given a good behaviour bond just 3 months ago over a knife crime. And I won't name the state school he went to, but a former student there, himself from a Muslim family, recently wrote in a leading newspaper of his own time at the school how almost all the students were Muslim. How dozens celebrated when Islamist terrorists murdered nearly 3,000 Americans in the September 11 attacks. Police also complained they were banned from giving anti-extremist talks at this school for a while. And there's one particular thing here we need to be honest about: Islam, specifically radical Islam. This government, for instance, has said next to nothing about Islamic hate preachers in Sydney who've got away with menacing messages like this against Jews particularly.
That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told you that they cause mischief and fasad and evil on the earth.
If there is a Yahudi behind me, come and kill him.
And again, let me repeat, Muslim leaders say they condemn this attack, but we cannot ignore the record here of attacks by radical Islamists, many by people we actually took in as refugees, including Manmonis, who staged the deadly Lint Cafe siege in 2014, Numan Haider, an Islamic State recruit who stabbed 2 police in Melbourne, Fahad Jabbar, who killed police accountant Curtis Cheng while shouting Allah is the greatest, and Mohammed al-Barialeh, who became a recruiter and fighter for the Islamic State, and Somali-born Yaqub Khaira, who murdered a worker in Melbourne, shot 3 police and told Channel 7, this is for IS, the Islamic State. This is for Al-Qaeda. And I'm not even counting all the many Islamist plots foiled by the police and security agencies. The Ben Breaker conspiracy to attack the MCG, or the gang leader who ordered my own execution. Now, I started by saying we needed a debate about this. This has been almost impossible, though. If you try, along comes the ABC or a media policeman or a human rights organisation or a politician to howl you down or smear you as a racist, like the ABC's Media Watch.
But now to multicultural Australia and the nation's most read columnist, Andrew Bolt, whose rant against foreigners last week marks a new low even for him.
Unity lost to the new tribes. There is no us anymore, as a tidal wave of immigrants sweeps away what's left of our national identity. Another 240,000 foreigners joined us last year alone, not just crowding our cities, but changing our culture.
In fact, as the son of immigrants myself, my argument there was my argument today. We are becoming a nation of tribes with less and less sense of a common identity, common loyalties, a common sense of justice. The concept of us and we is being washed away. And it's being made worse by our politicians, their mass immigration, their multicultural policies. Keep your culture. The dangerous preaching of contempt for this society with fake horror stories of genocide and stolen children. And now their poisonous race politics, preaching division, even preaching war.
This is a war!
All that must stop. As I said at the start of this year, what Australians need, and I think now demand, is politicians who look to unite, not divide, who honour our history and our symbols, not trash them, who speak to us as Australians all, not members of some tribe or, as they now say, community. The urgent challenge of government now is not to celebrate what divides, but what unites, to once more make of our many tribes one people. Because we've just been warned. Bishop Mamari has undergone surgery, mostly for wounds to his head. The New South Wales Police Commissioner says he's lucky to be alive. A fellow priest was also stabbed. Now, the Bishop's Christ the Good Shepherd Church is in Sydney's west in the federal seat of Fowler. In fact, 75% of Australia's 61,000 Assyrians live in and around that area, and the federal member there is independent Dai Lee. Dai Lee, is always great to talk to you, but perhaps I wish it was a better subject than this. What impact
Absolutely.
has this stabbing had on locals?
Good evening, Andrew. It's a privilege to be on your program. Can I just actually also correct? It's about 5% of the population in Fowler are of Assyrian heritage. That's about 8,500 people, and the population here is about 173,000. That's in my electorate. The impact on our community has been obviously has sent a shockwave through the community. The Bishop Mari Emmanuel is a loved bishop for a section of the Assyrian community, which is the Christ of the Good Shepherd Church. There are about 3 or 4 major Assyrian churches here in Fowler. So he's one of them. And so that his congregation really, have a high regard for him. And they're all shocked. And I just spoke to somebody here in the office who just came past here. He's our cleaner, and he just says the bishop is very well loved, and he's been a shock. So they're trying to come to terms with that. But I can also say that it has also shocked the community that there's a huge crowd there that obviously, harmed and injured quite a lot of the police officers who came last night to try and obviously de-escalate the situation, but that wasn't the case. So as you can imagine, it has been really challenging for me as a member who've always been proud of our wonderful, diverse community. And that is something that I've constantly stand up and talked about. And I don't want that to be destroyed in any way, because we are a very multi-faith, one of the most multicultural and multi-faith communities in the country. So therefore it's important that we live side by side in peace and harmony. So I hope that the police, with the powers that has now been given by the Premier, that they will get to the bottom of the issue and get to the bottom of it as quickly as possible, because I believe that the labelling, the description of it will impact many in our community. They're living in fear at the moment, Andrew, as you can appreciate.
Well, I can imagine, but this is the thing, Daly. I mean, like you say, a very multicultural community, multi-ethnic, multi-religion, multi-everything. But we're now seeing the fault lines, right? People living in fear. I know you want to condole with the Assyrians, as we all do, to have a bishop stabbed in front of their congregation with the live streaming. It's just too horrible. But the attack on the police and even the paramedics who came to help, how do you explain that?
Look, I think nobody actually condoned that. I think that is appalling. I think that, in light of what happened, I know that many of our law-abiding citizens are very upset with what happened and how the first responders have been treated. And all I can say as an elected member is I want to extend my sincere apology to those women in blue who've been hurt, and paramedics as well. But I believe that that's a certain group and a certain, group of people who kind of attend that to really cause this kind of problems. But as put it, we had just come out of the situation in Bondi where 6 innocent lives have been taken. And as a result of that, people were on tender hooks. So I think that...
I've got that, Daly, but really, you're quite correct, but no one after that terrible rampage in Bondi then took it out on the streets and took it out on... This is something different. That's what I'm talking about. But Daly, look, it is very tricky, and I want to talk to you again about this when passions cool and more is known. Thank you so much indeed for your time. One thing we do know is the bishop was taken to Liverpool Hospital, as it seems was the alleged attacker who reportedly lost the finger in his attack. He used the pocket knife, maybe it closed it, I don't know. The hospital had to be locked down for safety. This is just unbelievable in Australia. Now, with all this preoccupation with the stabbings in Bondi and last night in the Syrian church, it was a good time for Environment Minister Tanya Plibersek to sneak out the government's latest attack on business. Now, look, that might be a little unfair. Plibersek, I'm sure, had planned today's delayed announcement before last night's attack. But it's a nature-positive plan that she's been promising for years, delay. But it's been attacked by so many business groups that Plibersek has cut it right back for now. Today, she announced yet another green bureaucracy, armed with massive fines against companies that damage the environment.
For extremely serious intentional breaches of federal environment law, the courts would be able to impose fines of as high as $780 million or send people to prison for 7 years.
Wow. There's also supposedly going to be faster approvals for developments that's meant to please business, but she's promising more of her nature-positive plans later. Joining me each Tuesday is Nationals frontbencher Matt Canavan, the former Resources Minister. Matt Canavan, your response to this nature-positive plan?
Nature positive plan, Andrew. It's a jobs negative plan. That's what this is. This is going to deter investment in our country. It's putting up more red tape, in this case green tape, on those people who want to create jobs and build and develop our nation. Of course, we need to have stringent laws to protect our environment. We already have such laws and have had them for decades. It's very, very difficult to get a major project going in this country, and there should be hurdles to do that, to prove that you're not going to have a significant impact on major items of national environmental significance. That should be there. But what this proposal does is take out of the hands the power and responsibility to administer those laws from the officials, from the parliamentarians you elect that are accountable to you, and puts them into the hands of unelected Canberra bureaucrats. So this nature positive plan is only going to be a jobs positive plan for one part of the country, and that's for the Canberra bureaucracy. And I don't think the way forward for our country is to give more and more power to Canberra. That's why people like the WA Premier have been critical of the government's plans here. He is very concerned that this bill will mean more power for Canberra and take away the decision-making responsibilities, the control that Australians have over their natural environment. I mean, I see it firsthand. I live on the Great Barrier Reef, just kilometres from the Great Barrier Reef, and we're sick and tired of people that don't live there, who have no idea about the reef, telling us what its state is, what we should do about it, how evil we are for wanting to have a functioning economy and live next to these beautiful natural assets. We want to protect those natural assets. We just need to have the power and responsibility to do so.
Well, your point about the bureaucracy, here's a new one, as if we don't have enough already, is quite well made, because honestly, every big decision, I mean, they're talking fines of 700 million plus, every big decision of a development of a mine or a dam or whatever does involve some damage to the environment, a change to the environment. And these are political decisions, essentially. Is the damage or change you make worth the gain in some other way? That is a political decision, not a bureaucratic one. This, I think, has a chilling effect, again, like so much the government has done, on development.
And don't forget renewable energy. That has an impact too, right? That has a big impact. In fact, under the government's net zero plans, they want to blanket our country the size of half the size of Victoria in solar and wind turbines. And the issue here is, what do you think is going to happen when this Canberra environmental czar that will be appointed by a Labor government gets an application to destroy tens of thousands of hectares of koala habitat to build a wind farm, and another application to build less, usually about a tenth of the size less, to build a coal-fired power station or a coal mine? What are they going to do? How are they going to judge between those two items? We all know where that Canberra bureaucracy will fall on, what side of the ledger they'll fall on. And as I say, that takes power, responsibility and accountability away from you, the people, and enshrines it in unelected officials that don't have to account themselves to you. And so this will put a chilling effect on investment in our country. It's not what we need right now. I think you're right. The government has chosen a busy news week to drop this out. This was always a dirty deal they did with the Greens before the last election. They actually put out the proposal for this nature positive plan, so-called nature positive plan, on election eve. They put it out on election eve, the night before the election. They put out a media release saying they're going to do this because it was a deal clearly they had done with the Greens for their preferences, and they're trying to hide these plans from you again.
Matt, I can't stay away too long from that stabbing of the Christian bishop last night, something much of the world could have seen because the whole thing was live streamed, went international. The Prime Minister says this is the time to come together, to unite. I think he's right on that point. But doesn't that mean that he must then do the opposite of what his Labor government has done? The race politics, the voice, the multiculturalism, the mass immigration. Don't we need to have a completely new paradigm?
Well, I think one way we could unite as a country is to completely reject this attack on Christianity. I'd like to see our Prime Minister say that and defend the right of Christians and Christian parishioners and their priests to proselytise their own religion. Clearly, this preacher was attacked for preaching the Christian religion. We've also seen today the left-wing media and mainstream media in our country attack this Christian bishop for defending the Christian faith. They're out there calling him a bigot for his views on lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender issues. They're linking him to Donald Trump and all these epithets, almost suggesting, in fact, the Sydney Morning Herald suggested that his language was inflammatory. On the day after he'd been attacked, senselessly attacked in this violent extremist way. So I want our Prime Minister to defend the right of Christians to preach their religion and do so safely, and to crack down on those religious extremists that have been inciting violence ever since October 7th. You've catalogued this in your columns, but many preachers, many imams in Western Sydney have been doing nothing but inciting and violence. It's clearly that. And there's been no action taken against that, despite that being clearly against our laws already on the books.
So what you're saying about the Sydney Morning Herald, I mean, I'm hearing this again and again. Now it's provocative, inflammatory to defend your faith, unless it's one particular faith. It's like free speech. You know, if you just shut up, give away your free speech, you'll be safe. Sorry, that's not the Australia that we've grown up in that we want to preserve. I think it's insane. Matt Canavan, thank you so much indeed for your time. I see what is going on, and the lack of defence of the Australian values that I thought actually brought so many immigrants here, including my parents. Anyway, after the break, the government's internet censor here we go. Moves to shut down some coverage of this stabbing. And a Green senator also threatens to jail the boss of Woolworths, by the way. Has he gone too drunk with power? I'm joined now by my Tuesday panel, Will Kingston, host of Australiana, a weekly podcast from The Spectator on politics and culture, and Sky News host Danica Di Giorgio. You can catch her show, Prime Time, on Fridays at 7 p.m, and a new show, Danica and James, on Sunday at 8 p.m. Will, what lesson do we need to learn from this attack on Bishop Mari?
Well, I think the response is yet another example of worrying about Islamophobia before we worry about the threat of radical Islamism in this country. For me, the striking thing about it is that this was a kid, 16 years old, Andrew. Now, it's something which a lot of people don't know, but it's actually, allegedly, it's something a lot of people don't know is that it's actually younger Muslims that are more likely to hold hardline conservative Islamic views than older generations of Muslims in countries like Australia. They're more likely to believe in women wearing the veil. They're more likely to believe in Sharia law. They're more likely to believe in using violence for political ends because they see this sort of thing as a form of cultural, it's a way of basically cultural rebellion. Now, we need to use this type of footage as a way to have a national conversation about this, but I fear we're not going to do that because of that word Islamophobia.
I think you might be onto something there. Like, I'll just repeat that it's alleged that he's the killer. We've heard what he said. But anyway, whatever. We don't know. We don't know. But but on that point of more radical young. That is something that we've discovered in a big survey in January of French Muslims. The younger were actually more radical in some ways, and also to a survey in Britain that I've just recently discussed with Patrick Christie's, same thing. It's very worrying. What did you take out of what's happened, Danica?
Well, Andrew, the way that I read this is that Australia is very fractured right now. And as you mentioned in your editorial, this is not the Australia that we know and love. It's almost gotten to that point where it is unrecognisable. Just days after the Bondi stabbing, I don't think any of us could have fathomed an alleged terrorist attack on home soil. But we've got deep divisions in this country and a situation where a religious figure is made to feel unsafe in a place of worship. And how did we get here, Andrew? How did we get to this point? And I personally believe that the religious fractures began on October 9, 2 days after the October 7 attack, when there was that incident at the Opera House. And since then, it has fueled something within the community and people are genuinely frightened. And today it culminated in an alleged terror incident.
I think a lot of people have been ginned up. It's just terrible, including on social media. By the way, I should correct myself. I said killer. No one's dead. It's not a killer. It's an alleged killer. It's an alleged attacker. But speaking of that, and also coming back to a point that you touched on there, Will, the E-Safety Commissioner, backed by the Albanese government, has responded by demanding social media giants take down footage of the bishop being stabbed. Here she is.
And we could take them to court or we could fine them. If they fail to remove the content, then we can go to the search engines such as Google or Bing to really minimize the amount of content the Australians can see.
Yeah, well, maybe that's right. In fact, as viewers would have seen, we didn't show the full footage ourselves either. But then again, I wonder, it might be this, if they do this, it might be inhibiting a discussion of the consequences of government policies, the real consequences and the consequence of what could be is Islamist extremism. And I'm thinking about that because the footage of what Hamas did to Jews on October 7, the beheadings, the rapes, the mutilations, censored as well, not shown, and has helped Hamas apologists to claim it's all a lie.
It's not right, Andrew. This is another example of the unholy alliance between progressive liberals and conservative Muslims in Australia and indeed the Western world. It's very odd. Look, since the Vietnam War, we've seen that this type of visceral footage has a way of provoking debate and conversation and change in a way that, say, reading a newspaper article just won't. Is it shocking? Yes. Is it uncomfortable to watch? Yes. But at the same time, by seeing this type of footage, we are forced to confront uncomfortable truths. And in this case, the uncomfortable truth is that radical Islamism, and particularly the radicalisation of young children, is a big problem in Australia that we need to address.
And yet, Danica, footage like that is also scarifying and can habituate people to extreme violence and, of course, can be used as a recruiting tool.
Sure, but in the end, we are allowed to make informed decisions about whether or not we want to be viewing the vision of sorts. I do not believe that that vision should be censored. I believe it should be out there so that people can see it for themselves, look at it with their own eyes and make an informed judgment about whether or not this is a type of activity that we want to be seeing in our very much valued community. I do not believe in the cause. Now, understand, Andrew, from a perspective that there are multiple children logging onto TikTok and Instagram that have seen this, but that comes down to parental education and parental controls. But we're all adults here. We're allowed to see that vision. Unfortunately, we're not all adults, and a lot of kids have got parents that you wouldn't wish on them in the worst nightmare. That's the other thing too. So many underparented kids. That's also a concern. Now, with Australians preoccupied with these terrible stabbing attacks, it seems to me Green Senator Nick McKim today thought he'd better up the rhetoric to get a headline. Threatened to jail Woolworths boss Brad Banducci at a Senate committee hearing on supermarket prices. McKim wanted to know what their profit margin as a percentage of equity was, which is a high figure, probably around nearly 30%. Banducci would also only wanted to talk about a return on investment, which is much lower figure. Here is their exchange.
Why won't you confirm what your ROE was?
Senator, with due respect, we focus on our return on investment.
All right, I know what you focus. Thank you, Mr. Banducci. I know what you focus on.
I've answered the question many times.
You have not answered the question, Mr. Banducci. Honestly, I'm not interested in your spin or your bullshit. This is a Senate inquiry. Answer the question. He's open to the Senate to hold you in contempt, and that carries potential sanctions, including up to 6 months imprisonment for you.
Will Kingston, fair enough to threaten Banducci with jail?
No, this story is awash with irony, Andrew. How ironic for a politician to lecture anyone on evading a question, and how ironic for a Green senator to lecture a CEO on business. If I was Banducci, I would have gone the Julia Gillard route. I will not be lectured to about economics by this man. Look, this is the Americanization of. This is the Americanization of Australian politics, Andrew. This is the same thing that Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez does in these sorts of Senate hearings. It's no longer about holding people to account. It's really a way for a senator like this to get a 60-second grab on social media.
And it succeeded, Danica.
Well, it did succeed because he put the clip up on social media, Andrew, within, half an hour of him going out there with his big performance today. I mean, seriously, he knew exactly what he was saying. He knew it would get a headline. He knew people like us would be talking about it this evening. But look, seriously, who is going to be listening to Nick McKim? I'm sure Brad Banducci is probably thinking, who is this lunatic?
Well, we'll see. Gee. Just quickly, finally, Will, with all the mayhem in the past few days, the one light has come from the heroes who confronted the killer at Bondi Junction Mall on Saturday, including Frenchman Damien Guiraud, who fought off the murder with just the bollard. Good on him. Today, a reward from the Prime Minister.
I say this to Damien Guiraud, who is dealing with his visa applications, that you are welcome here, you are welcome to stay for as long as you like. This is someone who we would welcome becoming an Australian citizen, although that would, of course, be a loss for France.
Good call, Will?
Yes, it is. The lowest of low-hanging fruit, but a good call. And I would also say probably politically motivated as a way of supporting Albanese's high immigration agenda, but no one's going to argue with this.
And Danica, what do you make of it?
Well, this is one person that we do want in our country, Andrew. I think that there is no real silver linings from what happened the other day. But if there is one silver lining, it's people like this man who ran towards the attacker, stood up to the attacker and tried to protect so many others. So I think fantastic. We'll welcome him with open arms.
Yes, showed a lot of Australians what to do. Will Kingston, Danica De Giorgio, thank you both so much for your time. After the break, Donald Trump isn't just in court facing charges that could get him jailed. The judge has also ordered him off the campaign trail for the next few weeks. Is this a dirty fix by a corrupt political class? American politics seems getting dangerously close to the politics of a banana republic. If you're elected, get your opponents jailed. Donald Trump yesterday became the first president to ever face a criminal court, charged with falsifying business records to allegedly hide the $130,000 US he paid porn star Stormy Daniels to get her to say nothing about their affair. It's the first of 4 criminal cases Trump faces, and the judges ordered him to be in court every day for weeks to come, which Trump said was just what his Democrat enemies wanted ahead of the election.
That I can't go to my son's graduation, or that I can't go to the United States Supreme Court, that I'm not in Georgia or Florida or North Carolina campaigning like I should be. It's perfect for the radical left Democrats. That's exactly what they want. This is about election interference. That's all it's about.
Joining me is Adam Crichton, the Washington correspondent for the Australian newspaper. Great to see you, Adam. Look, if this wasn't Donald Trump, would the Democrat prosecutor have charged him?
Look, certainly I don't think so. In fact, the previous DA, Cyrus Vance, I believe his name was, he looked at these charges in 2019, 2020, and he declined to bring them. So I think there's a strong chance that these are politically motivated. Of course, they were brought last year by the Democrat Alvin Bragg. He's raised $800,000 at least off, from this indictment so far. So it's clearly benefited him personally. So look, I think you have to have quite a lot of sympathy with Donald Trump's argument that this is a very politically motivated prosecution.
Yes, we must remember that Bragg is an elected official and therefore he needs that cash raising for his election expenses. Bingo! Maximum penalty that Trump faces, 4 years jail. What are the odds?
Well, it's 4 years. It's actually 4 years per count. So it's 4 times 34 in theory, which I'm sure the former president would not get. Of course, it only takes one of the 12 jurors to dismiss the case, but even that could be a tall order in Manhattan, where something like 88% of voters voted for Biden at the 2020 election. So, look, there's a high chance, I think, that he might be convicted. Now, that means that the judge will have to sentence. I don't think a judge would give him jail time. These are unusual charges, and of course he is a former president. He's also the Republican nominee, so I think it's very unlikely that he got jail term, but I think he could get a conviction, and in that case he could also take a hit in the polls. That's what some polls suggest at the moment.
Well, that's an interesting point, Adam, because look, so far it seems that Donald Trump has raised a ton of money, has risen in the polls, claiming that he's a victim of the corrupt deep state operation, Democrats misusing the judicial system to try and put him away because to protect Joe Biden. Do you think that they will actually reverse now if he's actually convicted?
Well, look, I don't think so, because people made those same arguments when the indictments came out that they would hurt him, and they simply didn't. I mean, you could actually say that, the 4 criminal indictments against him have really powered his whole political renaissance, I think you'd have to say. I mean, they've made him much, much more popular, including among independent voters. So if the aim was to damage him, so far it certainly has done the opposite. But going forward, what does a conviction mean? Look, I mean, I tend to not think it'll make any difference, because everyone's already absorbed all this information. They've already made up their mind about whether he's guilty or not. This has been in the public domain for years. So I don't think a conviction is really going to make too much difference. Where it does make a difference, of course, is it could, in theory, see him completely barred from campaigning. But that said, focus on these cases is a lot of earned media for the Trump team, and they seem to have helped him so far.
Except, of course, it's a rather grubby hill to die on, hush money for a porn star.
Yes, look, that's right. Although, as someone told me recently, Alexander Hamilton paid hush money, so anyone who's seen the Hamilton Broadway play will not think it's particularly unusual.
Well, thank you very much for that cultural reference. The always cultured Adam Crichton. Thank you so much indeed for your time, mate. Good on you. After the break. And now the French president warns that Islamist terrorism could actually force a change of plan even with the Paris Olympics. I'll talk to our regular guest, Esther Kraku, whose Twitter account has just mysteriously closed. It's not just here. And now French President Emmanuel Macron warns that the opening ceremony of the Paris Olympics, that's in July, might be moved indoors if the terrorism threat is too high. France has, as you know, been hit by some terrible Islamist attacks. The danger has already forced the organisers to halve the planned crowd to 300,000 people, who at this stage will still gather around the river, the Seine, but that could now change because it's a dangerous world, as you know. Joining me from London is writer, broadcaster and columnist Esther Kraku. Esther, great to see you again. Britain, of course, has had its own terrible Islamist attacks, bombings in London of buses and trains, a concert in Manchester. Did the stabbing in Sydney of a Christian bishop during a live stream service make big news in Britain, or are you sort of habituated?
Well, in many respects, we were quite shocked that this happened in Australia, because this level of violence, particularly to do with knife crime, is more at home, should I say, unfortunately, here in the UK. You hear of horrific instances of people, particularly young people, even on public transport, on buses with giant machetes going around stabbing each other. There was a horrible video of someone literally being stabbed on an overground train. That the victim was lying on the ground. The person continued to stab him, and passengers had to pull him off and restrain him. So this is actually something that we're shocked happened in Sydney. But the rising threat of terrorism, particularly Islamist terrorism, is not just happening in the UK. It's happening all over Europe. The most recent Champions League games in Liverpool here in the UK and in Madrid in Spain. Police were on high alert because of sort of warnings from ISIS that they were going to attack. It's really awful. Now, in the case of the Sydney stabbings, obviously in Bondi, which were horrific, there were people that jumped to conclusions and thought they were Islamists, which is obviously very wrong. But I think the wider threat is the fact that many of these Western countries don't know the people that are entering their countries. They don't know who's infiltrating their borders and the ideologies that they're bringing along with them. And the native population is suffering from it. And unfortunately, we're going to probably see a rise in this sort of violence from these aliens with evil ideologies. I mean, the French know it very well. Look at the Bataclan attacks in 2016, where they actually also targeted a sports venue during the Germany versus France friendly. So unfortunately, many Western countries have to be on high alert, and we have to be unafraid to have frank conversations about the kinds of people we're letting into our countries.
You make a good point. People tend to forget in the West that you import not just a person, but a culture. I think there's an arrogance here that people will automatically lovingly embrace the culture they're coming to rather than hang on the one they're coming from. That is not necessarily always the case. Over the weekend, you've had British jets helping Israel to shoot down all those missiles and drones fired at Israel by Iran. But meanwhile, your Labour leader, Keir Starmer, had pro-Palestinian activists actually camp outside his home, forcing his Jewish wife to stay somewhere else for her security. This is getting really ugly, Esther.
I mean, it's got to the point where it's absolutely ridiculous. I mean, the Prime Minister recently earmarked millions of pounds to boost security for members of Parliament because they're facing these rising threats. I mean, this particular group that camped outside of Keir Starmer's house are called Youth Demand. And the name denotes as stupid as they sound. It's just a bunch of young kids with nothing better to do than to demand things that they want because clearly they think they know better than everyone else. And this is getting out of control. I mean, if we look at actually what's happening geopolitically, Israel has been attacked now in the space of less than a year twice. In the case of the recent Iranian attacks, you actually had other Muslim countries coming to the aid and defending Israel. So I really don't understand where these people are getting their geopolitical news from. And it's become so painful. I've actually even taken a step back from talking about it on Twitter because I just don't understand the logic. These people have no understanding of history or basic warfare or of what it means to be an ally or anything like that. And this is the manifestation of it. You have young, ignorant people doing stuff like this and putting people's lives in danger.
Yeah, but Esther, I reckon a lot of that is explained by the fact that human beings, political events, tragedies exist not in their own reality, but just as metaphors or symbols to be pushed around in an ideological war in people's head. There's nothing real about it. They engage the world like it's some sort of shadow play. But you mentioned Twitter, Esther. I got to correct myself, or is it correct myself? I look up normally what you've been up to. I look up Esther K because I'm too lazy to type out Esther C. Kraku. And I swear it's not my own fault. You tap on when you get the result, Esther K, as I did this time, and something went wrong. Your link has been hijacked, Esther. It doesn't exist, but
yes.
It does.
I need to get it back. No, I think it's just it's a mistake of my last name. But it'll probably self-correct. But Twitter has been a cesspit these last few days. I mean, I'm actually shocked. I'm a bit offended as a British taxpayer that this is the quality of some graduates, school graduates that they're pumping out, that they have no understanding, not even of World War II or any basic history. I mean, the kinds of things we've been seeing is just what a waste of taxpayer money, honestly.
It's the cracker, but your Twitter account is not a waste of time. So thank you so much indeed for your time here as well. That's it from me. Coming up, Sharry Markson.